How you doing? This is Brother Gus, and I'm coming at you with a Bible study. I want to do a series of Bible studies, and it's going to be titled the Passion Week. All the stories and all the events that occurred during that last week of Jesus' earthly ministry. Um, um, like for example, the next Bible study after this one's going to be the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Today's Bible study is like an introduction. I want to establish the purpose of that feast that he went to. It was a feast of the Passover. The whole week had to deal with the Passover. Um, the other feast that was meshed together with it was the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of First Fruits. But the greatest significance would be of the Passover because Jesus was our Passover lamb. Um, it was the biggest feast of the year. It was probably the most important because it was one of the greatest events that occurred in the Jewish history and the deliverance of the captives. So after God had brought the Jews out of Egypt, that's when they began their calendar as a nation. It was, the day of the Passover. I think it was Nisan 14, and so that's where the calendar began for Israel, and that's where it triggers where all the feasts after that are timed after this particular feast, and so it affected the calendar. It created the calendar for Israel, and they can count back and they can determine the moons and all these things and all the celebrations and the feasts based on when the Passover occurred. The story of the Passover is where God remembered his people that, he made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he had a purpose for them being in captivity, whatever it was. I'm not sure at this particular point. But after 400 years, he remembered them. And God was dealing with an oppressive ruler. The Egyptians were the superpower at that particular time. And they had dominion. They had dominance over, I don't know, about 1 million Jews. So God had to show his power and his strength in order to pull Israel out of Egypt. God had, he brought down 10 plagues upon the Egyptians. 9 of them dealt directly as a direct assault against the gods of Egypt. The 10th one had to do directly with Pharaoh and his firstborn, because Pharaoh was worshipped as a god, and so attacking Pharaoh in that manner, it just did something to his head because, hey, I'm supposed to be a god, and all of a sudden this god comes out of nowhere. He sends this Moses guy, and all of a sudden they're attacking my nation, and all of a sudden now he kills my firstborn. So that was quite a wake-up call for Pharaoh. So it attacked Pharaoh because he was considered a god, and attacked his firstborn. And not only it killed all the firstborn throughout all of Egypt. And so, every firstborn was killed. Pharaoh was made to know Yahweh, that Yahweh was Lord. God provided great revelation of himself and his saving abilities, where, it was an amazing feat. And yet the Israelites, I wasn't going to go down there, but the Israelites, they didn't grasp completely the awesomeness and the power that it required in order to bring them out of their captivity, to bring them out of their enslavement. So that it can be said in Deuteronomy 26:8, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great deeds of terror, with signs and with wonders. And surely God did great and mighty and awesome things in order to bring them out of Egypt. And not only that, he managed to get them to take, to plunder the Egyptians. The Egyptians gave them gold, silver, jewelry, gave them all kinds of things. Says, here, take these things and take them with you. We don't want them no more. Just leave, So they plundered Egypt too before they went out. And another mighty awesome event that occurred during the big Exodus. It was a huge Exodus. They say it could have been anywhere from 1 million to 3 million people that came out of Egypt. And God led them out of Egypt and He led them into the desert. And He was well equipped, for sure, and well prepared to provide for His people, even in the desert, in the most barren of all places. God told them, we're going to go this way. And He took them to the Red Sea, and the people began to panic, and they seen Pharaoh and his armies, whatever was left of, whatever. I don't know how they mustered up enough encouragement or motivation to say, you know what, unless it was just out of pure hatred and they resentment and they just wanted revenge. So the entire army was coming against Egypt, and Egypt was panicking and says, okay, what are we supposed to do? And here we have God parts the Red Sea. There's different people argue about how deep it was, whatever it was, but whatever depth it wasn't crossable. It wasn't, even if it was knee deep or chest high, you would have sunk into the mud, the mushiness of the ground. But whatever depth of the water it was, God parted it wide enough to allow, let's just say at a minimum of 1 million people to cross on dry land. And so this was the mightiness and the awesomeness of God through this event. And God called it the Passover. And the main reason why He called it the Passover, because He required of the people to slay a lamb for most every house. And maybe, if one house couldn't afford it or whatever, a couple of families could have got together and they could have slain a lamb. And what was required was that they were supposed to get the blood of that lamb, and they would use a plant called the hyssop. And they would use that plant to put the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel, the upper part of the door. And He says, put this on all your houses, so that when the destroying angel comes by, when the spirit of death, the angel of death comes by, or God Himself comes by, that when He will see the blood upon your house, that He will pass over, and you will be protected, and you will receive mercy. And so the Egyptians didn't do that. And so during the night, God went over and passed over all the Jewish people, because everyone did and obeyed what God had asked them to do. But the Jews, either they didn't know or they wouldn't do it, but because there was no blood on their doorpost, the firstborn of every house, the firstborn of every cattle or what have you, died. Pharaoh's son, his firstborn, died. God killed him. And that just put a piercing sword into Pharaoh's heart, where it's like, the stubbornness, his hardness of heart. People say, oh, God forced him to have a hard heart and to turn against God. No, he was already a wicked guy. So it was easy for God to work with this guy, because He already had within his mind and within his heart wickedness. Because don't think he was a real nice emperor. No. The guy was not good news. So, people, oh, God was, forget about it. The dude was already wicked. He was already a bad person. And so God had mercy upon all those that had the blood of the lamb upon their doorposts. So God was merciful. God killed the firstborn. And so let's fast forward to the New Testament. Jews from all over the empire were required, Jewish adults were required to come to this festival and 2 other festivals, so 3 festivals out of the year. All male adults were required to come to this particular feast. And so the population in Jerusalem just swelled up. It was just like, in the Old Testament, the expression of flood. It's used of a flood of an enemy going into a city or a country, or a flood of individuals coming out of a city or out of a country. But in this situation, the population swelled, and in some cases, and in some documentation, and some scholars believe that, it could have been anywhere from 1 million to 3 million people at a particular feast of the Passover, which was annual. Because this was supposed to have been observed throughout all their generations. It was something that was required. And so we have ancient writings, Jewish writings. Probably it was Josephus, because I had read this before, and he was a Jewish historian. He actually lived through 70 A.D., the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the nation of Israel, and he witnessed the abhorrence and the desecration and the desolation, of the temple. It was just ransacked completely, and he was an eyewitness to these things, and he wrote these down, and these things are real important for us to read. But anyways, he was a historian. He wrote that in 40 A.D., 10 years after this particular event, that they slaughtered some 260,000 lambs. Okay, so at that time, Jewish law permitted 10 individuals per lamb. In other words, you can get 10 people, and then they pitch in, or they come together, and they got one lamb, and the blood of that lamb would cover those 10 people. So if we multiply 10 by 260,000, I'm not a mathematician, but I think it'd come out to about 2.6 million people at the Feast of Passover in 40 A.D. That's an awesome amount of people in one location, in one city, and in the courtyards of the temple. So these things, they gathered a lot of people, and trust me, the Romans probably brought in a couple of legions in order to police this kind of activity, and probably didn't play games with them. Any kind of an uproar, that they'd be right there and says, we're gonna slice up people and we'll ask questions later. But for the most part, there wasn't any problems at this particular Passover. There was no uproars, even though when we do talk about the triumphal entry, that there was a huge commotion, and we'll get to that in the next video. But of all the millions of lambs that were sacrificed from the beginning of when God instituted the sacrificing of lambs and of bulls and of goats, and up to that point, none of those lambs could take away the sins of anybody or any sin at all. We know that in Hebrews 10:4 it tells us, "For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins." But, however, there was one lamb, and that lamb had a name, and his name was Jesus Christ. And see, he was sacrificed at this particular Passover. It was a very special Passover in God's eyes and in God's heart, because this was going to be the Passover when his son was going to be the lamb that takes away the sins of the world. And then from that point, Jesus was going to die once and for all. And it's not going to be necessary anymore. I know Jews try to, they cut up lambs on Passover right now in Israel, but you know what? God doesn't honor that. It's an abomination, because what they're doing is just spitting in the eye of God and not accepting the sacrifice of his beloved son, which caused the destruction of Jerusalem because of the rejection of Jesus in 70 A.D. See, the blood of Jesus had power to take away sins, not only the sins from the beginning of time, of the future, eternity past, but eternity future. In other words, the Old Testament saints, they look forward to the redemption that God was going to offer in the future. We look back for the redemption that was offered for us in the past. And so that was a turning point. The cross was the crossroads of the human race. And so that's what we need. And what happens here is that blood is available for all of us. If we accept and if we believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, that he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and that we bow down to that king and not use him as our little genie and say, well, you know what, I have my list of things for Jesus to do, and if Jesus doesn't do these things, then I'm out of here, dude. But it's not about us. It's not about our needs. I hear people throughout the years of saying, oh, well, you know, I told God I this and that, I did that, and it's just, you know what? It's not about you. You know, well, I got blessed because I told him, and this, well, you know, the world gets blessed too because he takes care of the unrighteous as well as he takes care of the righteous. He takes care of the wicked as well as he takes care of the righteous. So it's like, you know, people can try and think that they can manipulate God, but they're actually greatly deceived. That was the purpose, you know, of this Passover, and it was always a reminder. The Jews had to not only just remember it, but they had to act these things out and go to Jerusalem. And so I'm going to cut the video at this point, and I just want to lay down, you know, just the foundation about the Passover and what was going on during that feast and the sacrifice. And we know that during that, at the end of that week, Jesus was crucified, and we'll get into more of that. And there's a lot of things that went on in Jesus's life during that week, and I want to make short videos on a lot of the episodes that occur. So at this point, thank you for listening. God bless you, and we'll see you on the next video.